Hey guys, I've gotten a number of questions about ligatures over the years, so let's talk everything ligature. Saxophone ligatures come in a number of different styles. You can get them in metal, you can get them in fabric, you can get them in leather, and they all have different methods of applying pressure onto the reed. The ultimate goal that we want our ligature to have is to apply perpendicular, relatively even pressure to the reed so that the reed is firmly secured and sealed against the mouthpiece's table. There's many ways to do this successfully. Some mouthpieces have different plates or ridges or shapes that they use to press into the reed. I've not really found meaningful differences between ligatures that have different plates or shapes that press into the reed. I find they all perform about the same. Where things do change is when we're talking ligature material. I find leather ligatures sometimes can be a little bit inconsistent because you can sometimes stretch them over time. This is especially seen with old Rovner ligatures, which I know are very popular. So with leather ligatures, they can perform well. You just want to make sure that they fit properly. Sometimes these Rovners kind of fit at an angle as opposed to being perpendicular to the reed. And make sure that they're not stretched out, because you can sometimes even damage your mouthpiece by over tightening these leather ligatures and warp your table over time. String ligatures face a lot of the same issues as well, but they're harder to over tighten. I find that metal ligatures tend to be the most reliable and straightforward design when it comes to applying good pressure consistently from day to day without stretching or warping. The one drawback of metal ligatures is sometimes they don't fit perfectly across a number of different mouthpieces. They can be a bit more picky, and unlike the other ligature materials I mentioned, they're not going to stretch or conform to a mouthpiece. A leather ligature has a bit more forgiveness. A metal ligature will just not fit. Something I give to all prospective students that are auditioning or taking a lesson is I have this packet of information that tells you not just about me, but also about the studio. But more importantly, it also has equipment recommendations for different kinds of players. I have a whole page that's dedicated to just that. And the ligatures that I tend to like working with are ones that are reliable, ones that fit the mouthpieces that we tend to use in the studio, also equipment that's overall cost effective. We don't want things to be too expensive or burdensome. My first recommendations tend to be the BG Tradition, the BG Duo, the D'Addario H ligature, the Van Doren MO, and the Van Doren Optimum. They all work a little bit differently and have different perks, different pluses, different minuses, depending on your specific needs. The BG Tradition design used to be my all-in-one favorite recommendation because of its simplicity, and it used to be relatively affordable, but unfortunately, due to recent changes, now these ligatures are much more expensive. So sometimes a used copy might make more sense than one that's new. The D'Addario H ligature has a very solid design and is the most price conscious of all of them. However, there is a design flaw where at the corners of the H, if you over tighten, sometimes the ligature can outright snap in this weak spot. So you have to be careful when you're working with them. The Van Doren MO is the least pressure-oriented model because the material and mechanism that it uses to tighten are simply lightweight. It's a ligature that's more focused on being lightweight and minimal contact rather than a high-pressure design. But I do think it provides enough pressure and is a perfect match for any Van Doren mouthpiece in particular. Sometimes on Selmer mouthpieces, they don't quite fit right. They can be a little too big or too skinny. But on a Van Doren AL3 or other common Van Doren models, they're a really good fit. The Van Doren Optimum is an also excellent model. They fit perfectly on Van Doren mouthpieces as well, and I find that they work well enough on other mouthpieces too. I have yet to really find a situation where the Optimum doesn't fit. The Optimum comes with 3 plates, and the different plates provide a slightly different relationship of tightening. There's a 4 dots model that might put little puncture holes in your reed, but it holds it very securely. There's a ridges model that I like, and I find is a little bit more forgiving and doesn't put holes in the reed. And then there's also 2 lines model, which I think is okay. Sometimes it can leave 2 horizontal indentations on the reed. And it's also very similar to the Van Doren MO. So like if you're gonna use that, might as well get that ligature. But overall, the Optimum is pretty sturdy, fits a lot of different mouthpieces, and is pretty reliable. It's a really good model. I personally use a ligature by Air Music. just to show you how much ligatures don't really matter, this was a ligature that I found on the floor of my office one day when I was a doctoral student. It's very similar to a BG tradition ligature with a slightly different contact plate, but other than that, it's basically the same concept, and I paid $0 for it. It's been an excellent fit. At the end of the day, a good ligature will hold the reed securely. It'll provide that perpendicular pressure we're looking for. In doing that, it will ensure that more reeds play. It'll ensure there's less variation from day to day when you're playing on the same reeds, and overall provide a more consistent experience. What ligatures don't do is they don't change the tone, unless there's another problem, which we'll talk about. And they really don't provide a transformative experience as long as the fundamentals are in place. The biggest issues are if A, a ligature doesn't fit properly, therefore it's applying bad pressure, or B, if the mouthpiece is defective and has another problem. Players that claim to get really big improvements from their ligatures are probably actually dealing with a different issue altogether, and that is defective mouthpieces. So mouthpieces need to have a flat table in order to function properly, as well as a facing curve that is symmetrical and well designed so that you have the optimal balance of tone and resistance and the timbre that you're looking for. But sometimes mouthpieces have defects in one of these areas. Particularly, a lot of mouthpieces have what's called a concave table, where this area is either warped or dips slightly by design. I find that a concave table often introduces a lot more variation from one ligature to the next, because the ligatures will apply the pressure that they need to in slightly different ways, and then that interacts with the curve in the table. What ultimately needs to happen is that you need to play on mouthpieces that have a flat table and are free from defects, and then you can be liberated from the inconsistency that comes with that design. All in all, you don't need to spend a lot of money on the ligature. Try one of those on the lists, or try other ligatures that at least fulfill the parameters I mentioned before. You don't need to spend $250 on a fancy ligature to get a great sound. The ligature is really just the window dressing and should fulfill a few basic fundamentals.